There is a body of water so narrow, so strategically vital, that control over it has shaped the fate of empires, economies, and entire civilizations. It is not wide. At its most critical choke point, it stretches barely 33 kilometers from shore to shore. And yet, through this slim corridor of blue-gray water, more than 20% of the world's oil supply flows every single day. Tankers the size of city blocks, loaded with crude from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and Iraq, inch through this passage on their way to refineries in Asia, Europe, and the Americas. Without this flow, the global economy does not slow down. It stops. This is the Strait of Hormuz. And for decades, the question of who truly controls it has been one of the most consequential and least understood power struggles in modern geopolitics. On paper, the answer seems obvious. The United States Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, patrols these waters with an arsenal that no nation on Earth can match. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, nuclear submarines, and fighter jets circle this region in a permanent, rotating demonstration of overwhelming force. The United States has spent hundreds of billions of dollars projecting power into this corner of the Persian Gulf, and for good reason. To lose influence here would be to lose a grip on the economic lifeblood of the industrialized world. And yet, something strange has been happening in the Strait of Hormuz. Something that the raw tonnage of American naval power has struggled to answer. Ships have been seized in broad daylight. Oil tankers have appeared in port with mysterious craters blown into their hulls. Drones have swarmed through restricted airspace and vanished before they could be traced. GPS signals on commercial vessels have flickered and failed, sending ships off course into waters they did not intend to enter. And through all of it, one nation has maintained a posture of ambiguity, a posture of deliberate, calculated deniability. Iran. To understand what Iran has been doing in the Strait of Hormuz, you have to first abandon the idea that war looks the way it did in the 20th century. There are no declarations of war here, no front lines, no uniformed soldiers crossing borders in columns of armored vehicles. What Iran has developed, over decades of sanctions, isolation, and strategic necessity, is something far more difficult to confront. Military analysts call it asymmetric warfare. But in the context of the Strait of Hormuz, it has taken on a character so specific, so tailored to this geography and this moment in history, that it deserves its own name. Call it the Ghost War. The Ghost War does not begin with a missile strike or a naval battle. It begins with a phone call to an insurance broker in London. Here is how it works. A tanker operator in Athens is preparing to send one of his ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Standard procedure. His vessel has made this journey dozens of times. But before it enters Persian Gulf waters, his company must secure maritime insurance. And when the underwriters at Lloyd's of London open their morning briefing and see that there has been another incident in the Gulf, another vessel with unexplained damage, another suspicious drone sighting, another patrol boat moving erratically near a shipping lane, the risk assessment goes up. And when the risk assessment goes up, the insurance premium goes up. Sometimes dramatically. Sometimes by percentages that make the voyage significantly less profitable. The tanker operator has a choice. Pay the higher premium and absorb the cost. Pass the cost on to his buyers. Or wait and hope the situation stabilizes. In any of these scenarios, Iran has already won something. It has imposed a cost. Not through a battle it had to fight and potentially lose, but through the mere suggestion of danger, through the ghost of a threat, through a war that exists more in spreadsheets and actuarial tables than on any radar screen. This is the first pillar of Iran's strategy in the Strait of Hormuz. Economic disruption through ambiguity. And it is far more effective than it sounds. Consider the numbers. The Strait of Hormuz handles roughly 17 to 21 million barrels of oil per day. When tensions in the Gulf spike, even without a single shot being fired, oil futures markets respond almost immediately. In April of 2019, after a series of attacks on oil infrastructure and shipping in the region, Brent crude prices jumped by several percentage points within days. In the summer of 2019, after the seizure of the British-flagged tanker Stena Impero by Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces, shipping insurance rates in the Gulf surged to levels not seen in years. Some estimates place the war risk surcharge for a single voyage through Hormuz at figures that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. And here is the part that makes this strategy genuinely brilliant from Iran's perspective. Iran is itself an oil producer. Its economy, battered by American sanctions, is deeply dependent on oil revenues. When global oil prices rise, even Iran benefits, indirectly, through the black market channels and intermediaries it uses to sell its crude. The same instability that Iran manufactures through provocations in the Strait also inflates the value of the commodity it is trying to sell. It is a feedback loop of strategic genius, and it has been operating in various forms for over 40 years. But economic pressure is only one layer of the Ghost War. To understand the second layer, you need to look at a map of the Strait itself and think carefully about what that geography means for military operations. The Strait of Hormuz is not just narrow. It is surrounded. To the north lies the Iranian coast, with its mountains, its hidden naval bases carved into rocky inlets, and its Revolutionary Guard Corps naval command centers built into terrain that makes aerial reconnaissance difficult. To the south lies Oman, which maintains careful neutrality and cannot be used as a staging ground for offensive operations without diplomatic consequences. The shipping lanes themselves, 2 lanes, each roughly 3 kilometers wide, with a separation zone between them, run closer to the Iranian coast than to any other landmass. This geography is not incidental. It is the entire foundation of Iran's military strategy in the region. The United States Navy possesses the most powerful blue water fighting force in human history. Its aircraft carriers, floating airfields, essentially, carry dozens of combat aircraft and project power across thousands of kilometers of open ocean. Against a conventional naval adversary, this force is essentially unstoppable. But the Strait of Hormuz is not the open ocean. It is a crowded, confined, commercially trafficked waterway where the very assets that make American naval power so dominant in the Pacific or the Atlantic become, in certain respects, liabilities. A carrier strike group entering the Strait faces a fundamental problem. The group is large. It is visible. It moves relatively slowly. And it is surrounded, on the Iranian side, by a coastline that can hide almost anything. Missiles in underground bunkers. Fast attack boats in covered harbors. Drones in hardened facilities that look, from satellite imagery, like ordinary warehouses. Iran has spent decades and billions of dollars building what military analysts call an anti-access/area denial network, a web of systems specifically designed not to defeat American naval power in a conventional battle, but to make the cost of operating in this confined space uncomfortably high. The centerpiece of this strategy, the weapon that generates the most anxiety among American naval planners, is not the missile. It is the boat. Iran operates one of the largest fleets of small fast attack craft in the world. These are not warships in any traditional sense. They are speedboats, fiberglass hulls, powerful outboard motors, capable of reaching speeds of 60 or 70 kilometers per hour in calm water. Individually, each one is trivially easy to destroy. A single burst from a naval gun, a single missile, ends the threat. But Iran does not send them one at a time. The doctrine is called swarm tactics, and it is the subject of serious, ongoing concern in war games conducted by the U.S. Navy and documented extensively by institutions like the RAND Corporation and the U.S. Naval Institute. The concept is straightforward: overwhelming a defender not with superior individual firepower, but with the sheer number of simultaneous threats that must be tracked and neutralized at the same time. Imagine a carrier strike group transiting the Strait. The group's defensive systems are extraordinarily capable. Its radar can track hundreds of targets. Its missiles are fast and accurate. But those defensive systems are not unlimited. They have a finite number of interceptor missiles. They have finite computational bandwidth for tracking and targeting. And they are calibrated primarily for a threat environment that involves sophisticated, fast-moving adversary weapons. Not dozens of small boats approaching from multiple directions simultaneously, weaving between commercial traffic, some of them carrying missiles, some of them not, all of them requiring a split-second decision about whether to fire. In simulated exercises, and here the documentation comes from unclassified U.S. Navy reports and investigative journalism from outlets including the Washington Post and Defense News, swarm scenarios have produced outcomes that gave American planners genuine pause. Not because swarms would sink an aircraft carrier. The probability of that remains very low. But because the cost of defeating a swarm, in munitions expended, in crew exhaustion, in potential collateral damage to commercial shipping, is far higher than the cost of launching one. And Iran can afford to lose boats in ways that the United States cannot afford to lose destroyers. This is the asymmetry at the heart of the Ghost War, and it extends far beyond fast boats. In the early hours of June 13, 2019, Two oil tankers were moving through the Gulf of Oman, just outside the Strait of Hormuz. The Front Altair, a Norwegian-operated vessel carrying petrochemicals, and the Kakuka Courageous, a Japanese tanker, both reported explosions. Crew members were evacuated. The Front Altair caught fire. Within hours, the United States Navy released footage it said showed an Iranian Revolutionary Guard patrol boat approaching the Kakuka Courageous and removing what appeared to be an unexploded limpet mine from the ship's hull. Iran denied responsibility. The Japanese owner of the Kakuka Courageous said his crew had reported seeing flying objects before the explosion, not mines. The governments of Germany, France, and the United Kingdom expressed what diplomatic communiques called varying degrees of skepticism about the American assessment. Russia called the American evidence unconvincing. And that, right there, is the ghost war working exactly as designed. The attacks happened. Ships were damaged. The message was sent to the global shipping community, to the insurance markets, to the oil futures traders, to the governments of every nation whose economy depends on Persian Gulf oil. And yet, the ambiguity was preserved just enough to prevent the kind of unified international response that would have accompanied an unambiguous act of Iranian aggression. The ghost remained a ghost. This is a pattern that goes back decades. In the late 1980s, during what historians call the Tanker War, Iran and Iraq both attacked neutral shipping in the Persian Gulf as part of their broader conflict. Iran mined shipping lanes. It attacked tankers with missiles from Silkworm batteries on its coastline. It used speedboats to harass vessels. The United States eventually intervened, reflagging Kuwaiti tankers and providing them with naval escorts. In 1988, the USS Vincennes, a cruiser operating in the Gulf, shot down Iran Air Flight 655, killing all 290 people on board after misidentifying it as an attacking military aircraft. The incident was a tragedy, but it was also a demonstration of how the confined, commercially trafficked geography of the Strait creates conditions where catastrophic mistakes are almost inevitable. Iran learned from the Tanker War. It learned that direct confrontation with American naval power produced outcomes it could not afford. And it spent the following 3 decades building an entirely different kind of military capability. Not the capability to defeat the United States in a conventional naval battle, but the capability to make the Strait of Hormuz an uncomfortable, unpredictable, economically costly place to operate. The third layer of the Ghost War is perhaps the least visible and the most consequential for the future. It is the layer that exists not in the water or in the air, but in computer networks, satellite uplinks, and the digital infrastructure that modern commercial shipping depends on entirely. In December of 2011, a classified American reconnaissance drone, the RQ-170 Sentinel, landed intact inside Iran. The Iranians claimed they had brought it down by jamming its GPS signal and feeding it false location data, causing the drone's autopilot systems to believe it was landing at its home base when it was actually descending into Iranian territory. American officials disputed this account, suggesting the drone had malfunctioned. But the incident raised a question that has never been fully answered, and that Iranian electronic warfare specialists had been working on for years. If you can manipulate the GPS signal received by an aircraft, can you do the same to a ship? The answer, as subsequent events have made disturbingly clear, is yes. In 2017 and 2018, the U.S. Maritime Administration and the U.S. Coast Guard began receiving reports from commercial vessels in the Black Sea and, later, the Persian Gulf, of GPS anomalies. Ships' navigation systems were reporting positions that were miles away from their actual locations. In some cases, vessels were showing up on AIS tracking systems, the digital transponder network that allows ships to see each other and be seen by port authorities, as being on land, or in the middle of airports, or clustered together in formations that made no physical sense. The phenomenon has a technical name: GPS spoofing, and it is fundamentally different from jamming. Jamming blocks the GPS signal, which triggers alarms and alerts navigators that something is wrong. Spoofing replaces the genuine signal with a false one, a counterfeit signal so convincingly constructed that the ship's navigation systems accept it as real. The vessel continues on its course, confident in its position, while the actual position drifts toward shoal water, toward restricted zones, toward the territorial waters of a nation it has no authorization to enter. In July of 2019, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard seized the British-flagged tanker Stena Impero in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran said the vessel had violated maritime regulations. Britain said the seizure was an act of illegal piracy in retaliation for the UK's seizure of an Iranian tanker near Gibraltar weeks earlier. What received less attention in the subsequent diplomatic row was a detail buried in the technical reporting of the incident. The Stena Impero's GPS track, reconstructed from AIS data, showed unusual behavior in the hours before the seizure. Behavior consistent with GPS spoofing. Whether that spoofing was a contributing factor in the ship's position when Iranian forces boarded it remains a matter of dispute. But the broader pattern is not disputed. The U.S. Naval Institute, in multiple published analyses, has documented the growing prevalence of GPS interference in the Persian Gulf region and its correlation with periods of heightened Iranian-American tension. The capability exists. It has been demonstrated. And it adds yet another layer of ambiguity to every incident that occurs in these waters, making it harder for insurers to assess risk, harder for governments to assign blame, and harder for the United States Navy to respond to a threat it can observe but often cannot definitively attribute. Iran's proxy network represents the fourth and perhaps most geographically expansive dimension of the Ghost War. The strategy here is elegant in its ruthlessness. Rather than projecting Iranian military power directly into contested waters, which would constitute an unambiguous act of state aggression with all the diplomatic and military consequences that implies, Iran arms, trains, funds, and coordinates a network of non-state partners distributed across the region. Each partner operates with a degree of autonomy. Each maintains its own stated grievances and ideological motivations. And each provides Iran with what strategists call plausible deniability. The ability to say, with a straight face, that Iranian forces were not responsible for any given attack, even when the weapons, the tactics, and the targeting all point in one direction. The Houthis in Yemen represent the most globally consequential expression of this strategy. Since the outbreak of Yemen's civil war and the subsequent Saudi-led military intervention, the Houthis have received a steady flow of Iranian weapons, technical expertise, and operational guidance. The result has been a campaign of drone and missile attacks against Saudi oil infrastructure, against military targets throughout the Arabian Peninsula, and, critically, against commercial shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Between late 2023 and 2024, Houthi attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea produced one of the most significant disruptions to global trade routes since the Suez Crisis of 1956. Major shipping lines, including Maersk, MSC, and CMA CGM, rerouted their vessels away from the Red Sea entirely, opting for the longer and more expensive route around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. The additional distance added roughly 10 to 14 days to transit times and significantly increased fuel costs. Container shipping rates spiked to levels that rippled through global supply chains. And Iran's official position throughout? The Houthis are an independent movement acting in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Iran supports their cause but does not control their operations. This is the Ghost in its most operationally sophisticated form. A military capability that generates measurable, documented, economically significant consequences for the global trading system. Attributed not to a state, not to the Iranian armed forces, not to anyone subject to the rules of war between nations, but to a non-state actor operating from the ruins of a country already destroyed by years of civil conflict. The United States and its allies have not been passive in response to these challenges. Operation Prosperity Guardian, launched in late 2023, assembled a multinational naval coalition to escort commercial shipping through the Red Sea and deter Houthi attacks. American and British forces conducted strikes against Houthi military infrastructure in Yemen. The USS Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group deployed to the region in a demonstration of American resolve. And the ships kept getting attacked. Not because American naval power was ineffective. It was not. Individual Houthi drones and missiles were intercepted regularly. The coalition's presence prevented the situation from becoming catastrophically worse. But each intercepted drone cost the American Navy a missile that, depending on the type, carries a price tag between hundreds of thousands and over $1 million. Each Houthi drone cost perhaps a few $1,000s to produce. The arithmetic of that exchange, the economics of asymmetric attrition, is precisely the calculation that Iranian strategists have built their doctrine around. You cannot afford to defend everything, everywhere, forever. Eventually, the cost of maintaining the defensive posture exceeds the cost of the threat being defended against. And at that point, the attacker has achieved strategic success without ever winning a conventional battle. This is what winning looks like in the Ghost War. Not the destruction of the Fifth Fleet. Not the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Not a military victory that can be photographed and celebrated. But the slow, grinding, financially quantifiable elevation of the cost of American presence in the Persian Gulf, until American decision-makers, American taxpayers, and American allies begin asking a question that Iranian strategists have been waiting for them to ask. Is it worth it? The Strait of Hormuz has seen these questions asked before. In the 1970s, when Iranian oil underpinned American energy strategy, the answer was unambiguous. In the 1980s, when Iraqi forces threatened to destabilize the entire Gulf, American warships entered the fray without serious domestic debate. In the 1990s and 2000s, with American troops in Iraq and Afghanistan and oil prices defining the geopolitical calendar, the Fifth Fleet's presence was a non-negotiable cornerstone of American global strategy. But the world has shifted. The shale revolution transformed American energy production to the point where the United States became, for a period, the world's largest oil producer. American dependence on Persian Gulf oil, while still significant in global terms, declined from the existential dependency of previous decades. The political appetite for open-ended military commitments in the Middle East eroded through 2 decades of inconclusive wars. And into that erosion, into that widening gap between the cost of presence and the domestic willingness to bear it, Iran has been carefully, patiently, strategically inserting its ghosts. The mines that appear on tanker hulls. The drones that materialize from desert coastlines and vanish before attribution is possible. The GPS signals that silently falsify a ship's sense of where it is in the world. The speedboats that swarm through narrow waters in exercises designed to test the limits of American defensive response times. The proxies in Yemen and Iraq and Lebanon and Syria that extend Iran's military reach while preserving its diplomatic deniability. All of it, every piece of the Ghost War, serves a single strategic objective. Not conquest, not the destruction of American power, but the transformation of the Strait of Hormuz from a space of American dominance into a space of contested sovereignty. A space where every tanker captain and every shipping company executive and every maritime insurer must factor Iranian displeasure into their calculations. A space where the rules of American naval supremacy apply less completely and less predictably than they do in the open ocean. Because in the logic of the Ghost War, contested is enough. Contested means expensive. Expensive means sustainable only for as long as the political will holds. And political will, unlike aircraft carriers, does not replenish automatically. The Strait of Hormuz remains open today. Oil continues to flow. The Fifth Fleet continues its patrols. No war has been declared. No treaty has been signed. The ghost remains a ghost. But the cost of keeping it that way, the insurance premiums, the fuel surcharges, the rerouted shipping lanes, the interceptor missiles expended, the carrier strike groups deployed, the diplomatic crises managed and sometimes mismanaged, accumulates quietly in ledgers that few people see and fewer discuss publicly. Somewhere in that accumulation, in the gap between what American dominance of the Persian Gulf costs and what it delivers, Iran has found its victory. Not the victory of a nation that has defeated its enemy, but the victory of a nation that has made its enemy's presence expensive enough, ambiguous enough, and exhausting enough, that the question of whether to maintain it forever remains genuinely, dangerously open. The ghost does not need to win the battle. It only needs to haunt the corridor long enough to change the calculation. And in the 33 kilometers of water between the Iranian coast and the shipping lanes of the world's most vital maritime choke point, the haunting continues.